Welcome to Carolina Sculpture Studio. My name's Clint Button, and I'm a granite sculptor. Welcome to the Virtual Stone Carving Apprenticeship video number 117. Before I progress much further, we're going to talk a little bit about points that are in a different orientation and how you approach them. It's critical. I said this in previous videos about pointing. Whenever you shoot a point, it's in your best interest to approach it perpendicular to the tangent. But you want to go straight onto that circle so that you're completely perpendicular. You're at a 90-degree angle. Okay, if you figure the point is in that, you want to be perpendicular, perfectly straight up and down. Because if you come in at an angle, whatever angle that is, you'll tend to erode one side near that point, and you may need that material. And so if you're perpendicular to the tangent, you're at a better, you have less likelihood of wrecking material or surrendering volume around that point. So I wanted to shoot a point on her elbow before we went much further and to get this established. Now when you do this, and so if I had a pointing machine is easy because you've got that stylus, that needle that slides up and down. It's very easy to orient that needle so that you're perpendicular to that point. And then you just have to cut so the needle progresses as it needs to progress. You can take a drill, you drill a hole straight down, and that's really all you need to do. There's a little more to it than that, but that's effectively what you need to do, and that's how a lot of pointing is done. It's just with a drill, especially on marble. You could stay with even a hand drill and a bow and just run it right down. But when we're going from these early ones are very easy because they were on a flat surface. It was easy to approach them straight on, and then we could have our swipes, our strikes were real easy to read. When we change to a different surface, and this is on the outside of her elbow, like right in here, that point is on a vertical surface. And so if I had a pointing machine, I would have approached like this. I would have gone straight in, horizontal, or approximately. I would have gone whatever looked the most perpendicular I could get it, and I would go straight in. And if I had to dig this off, I'd dig it off. But when you're swinging compasses, you don't necessarily have an obvious direction. You're not the points of the compass don't necessarily tell you where to go. I could have approached this point from up here on the top, and I cut this away and dug down and dug down and dug down until these radii intersected. And in the process, I would have destroyed all this material above her arm that I probably would have needed. And so it's really important that you maintain a perspective on how you're going to approach a point. And so we cut this, and this is running into some issues with remember the circles I showed you, the plexiglass circles, because this is fairly low, and because of its position between the head point, the top point at the center that's a little bit lower, and this one's up a little bit from that, and then the point at the down on the plinth is up, they almost constitute a plane. Okay, remember? And so those three lines, those 3 points are almost in a straight line, and that means they're going to approach really close and stay together for a long time. So the point from her knee crossed and was pretty obvious. The other two swipes were almost superimposed on each other. So you got to make a judgment call as to where they fit and check and be careful and go slow and be slow and just keep checking. And now they clip right in. So, and this looks, I mentioned before, having all this stone on here can confuse you. And people like to strip everything off so they can get rid of it so nothing confuses you. You got to trust the process, okay? Because if you strip all this stone off, it may be fine, it may be no big deal, okay? Or you may wish you left it there. It's a lot easier to cut it off later than it is to waste it off now and find out that you really screwed up. So now we have a point on her elbow. Now I can start shooting a few more points along that different component, different element of this carving, and understand it'll be easy to leapfrog from one to the next, okay? So that's a big step in doing this. Now I've got the figure started, and I can keep shooting points, and I'll just expand out from there. But now I can take some more off down here. Okay, I want to try to move the camera. I want to explain before somebody asks. This isn't a portrait, okay? Not of this figure. I'm trying to duplicate this figure. I want to duplicate it very accurately. But any of these jobs, when you point something, there's a break even between time and money, okay? And how much time you want to put into it. And if you're carving an art project and you work on it for as long as you want and you don't care, and you can shoot a point literally every quarter of an inch over the entire job and have this beautiful honeycombed image, and it's just so cool. But the reality is that when you're doing this work on the clock, that's not necessarily feasible. And so there's a break even between how many points you shoot to locate the figure and the shapes in this mass of stone, and how much of it you just estimate and guess. And that's where we get into, I mentioned it before, this is a 2/3 scale model, so I'm gonna guess or invent basically 33% of this job. I'm just gonna make it up. I'm gonna have points I'm gonna shoot that are gonna accurately represent where everything is, and then the other third of it, I'm gonna just invent. So let me see if I can move the camera. I want to try to get this a little bit. Okay. These are points on her wings, okay? And this is a foundation point. This is important, okay? I could take and shoot like the edges of the feathers. This is a tip of a feather. This is a tip of a feather here. This is a tip of a feather. Another one up here. I could take and shoot these points all around the edge of each feather, however they fall. I could just go ahead and shoot all these points. If this comes down to a time concern, by the same method, I know where this point is, okay? And so I could go, let's just say I'm going to estimate that I can go 90 degrees. I'm going to take a pair of calipers, going to go on my model, I'm going to go at this point, I'm going to go just like we did before, and I'm going to estimate over from that point, on the model. Then I'll swing it on the, and it'll be however big, and then I'll swing it on the triangle and it'll grow a little bit. Then I'll come over here on the job and I can put that here and I can mark a small dot. And I could do it at 90 degrees to that line. And I could do it at, 90 degrees to that line again. And I could split them in half and do that and make some dots around there. And I can skip having to actually swing compasses to establish this, because these are feathers. Okay, feathers in drapery aren't like a facial likeness. Okay, there's probably going to be some variation. We have a lot of challenges when you produce models for people in clay, because the way you swipe or sweep clay is completely different than the way you carve stone. And so people will want you to put all the detail of the hair in there. And literally I've had patrons that were insistent that they wanted to see all of the hairs sawed or cut into the job, like you see on some of the Chinese work, and it looks like they're wearing a string mop. It's awful. The axing will produce those lines. There's detail that you don't produce in plaster just like there's details that you don't produce in stone. And it has to do with just a lot of times just the mechanical aspects of the media. So it's important to shoot enough points to accurately place everything when we're swinging these compasses. But there's a break even as to how much you accurately measure and how much you accurately estimate versus how much you actually just make up and guess, because you just look at it and carve and know that this is this part of a wing. And so what I'll end up doing is I'll probably shoot a few more points on around these feathers as we go along, but I'm not gonna shoot an exhaustive number of points around each feather, because it's just a waste of time. But that's, if you're pointing this up for someone else and they're paying you to do that and they're going to finish it, point as much as they're paying you to point. But if you're doing it on the clock for yourself, it has a lot to do with your familiarity and your competence. Okay, so that's what we're going to do, and I'm going to shoot a number of points until I can see enough of this that I understand. I'll take my calipers and I'll lay out detail around these known points that's reasonably accurate, and then I can just go ahead and peel it off. Okay, I want to show you something else too, so that you can be thinking about it, because before we get into it, and I want along thinking of it, I want to tell you that. Okay, this may seem like it's jumping ahead a little bit, but it's good to be thinking about all this detail while you're working and planning so you're ready for it. This is a corrected scale model, okay? And from right here, from this plinth at the bottom of her feet to the top of her head, she will scale up to 5'6", okay? And we did our triangle based upon this being a 4-foot tall model from the joint to the top, and this being a 6-foot tall stone from the joint to the top of her head, okay? We're gonna make her 5'7" instead of 5'6". We just cheated and we put the screws or the nails down here at what scales out to be 1 inch below her feet, okay? And it's 2/3 of an inch on the model. That won't have anything to do with our proportion, our ratio. All that's going to do is if we carved her just like she is, she would still be 5'6", but the plinth, if we carve this the way this is drawn, the plinth would be 1 inch up down here on the stone. Instead of where it is now, it would be 1 inch higher. So what we're doing is we're just going to cheat and add an inch in here at the bottom, because we're going to have extra material where we can sink her feet down and lower her. Now, what will look best when we're doing that is if we graduate, we hide that inch in between her knee and her feet. So what that means, I talked before about shifting the points, and where I could cut this point and I could shift it and move it towards her feet just a little bit. If I shift the point up here a little bit, and then it accumulates and accrues until it's actually the whole 1 inch, it'll end up looking better. And down here at the bottom, I can push this more or less almost an inch down fairly soon. This portion in here, we can't really carve much of this because this is on a descending transition area. And so if we shoot this point here and then shift it forward or shift it towards her feet, it's going to leave a hole. You know, I'm telling you this so it's in the same mindset as how we just did her elbow, where it was out on the edge. We want to make sure that everything is approached at the proper angle. If we cut this in here to depth and then try to shift the point here, it'll be too deep. And we can't just stay up because we don't necessarily know how to measure 1 inch up or 3/4 of an inch down. So we'll get to this point, and from right in here, we'll carve everything up there. And this is pretty safe down along the edge. We can cut down to where this wing is. And then we can cut things like this edge here, because this edge will shift lower. So you have to start thinking about how things will move and how things will transition. I'm hoping we can run the tip of her wing off because we're closer to the edge because this cast a little crooked. I'm hoping we can run the edge of her wing off a little bit so that the plinth that's sticking out, it catches it and it shows that it's coming off the stone. It'll make it look way more realistic than having a perfect check right there, because you'll be looking for a check, but instead there'll be a little bit of feather, a little bit of wing right there. So we'll see how it looks. It may not be feasible, it may be too fragile. But as you're working this and as you're thinking about how you approach different points, think about that, because these points where it's ascending or coming up, it's easy to cut that point and shift it forward some and should still leave enough material behind to carve what's there. We'll have to see. And we can also, we could shoot some of these points and just shoot them accurate and then leave them there until we start carving this. So we'll see how it goes, but should be able to hide an inch in here. It shouldn't be that big a deal, and everything else above that point will all be just the same size as it is, because changing her to 5'7", we're still in the same model. We're still in the same ratio. And that's the bigger point of what I was trying to make here, is that this is the same model and we're enlarging it at the same rate. We're using the same triangle. So because we're using the same triangle and this is corrected, it doesn't really matter where we put our points in here. Right now we're just carving her where there would be a plinth above this. It would be 6 inches. It'd be a little bit different than the 5 inches we've got drawn. We're going to use that extra inch to just stretch her legs a little bit. Okay? Hope that makes sense. It isn't too confusing. Just follow along and you'll see. But there's a lot of estimating and a lot of guesswork that goes into this in terms of how you're going to create the material that's left off. And the bigger lesson there is that's why carving something, people say, oh, I've got this really cute little model and it's 12 inches or 14 inches tall. I want to do a 6-foot statue out of it. Okay, buddy, you're going to get tutored, because there's going to be so many things that aren't clear in that statue. If you're going from 2/3 scale to full scale, you have to create 30% of that information, okay? If you go from, just say for instance, a 1-foot model and you're going to go to a 6-foot model to go life size with it, you've got to create 6 times, you're going to scale it up. So for every 6 feet of information, you've got 5 feet of guesswork, because, and that's a lot. So that's why, normally professionals, they might go 3 or 4 times, but the best work is typically, you'll enlarge it no more than a factor of like about 2 and correct it, and then you'll enlarge it again by a factor of about 2 and correct it, and then you'll do 3 or 4 steps and correct it every time, so you can have more and more information. It isn't just smart, it's professional. That's the way it works. So, let's get back to that. Like the TV show used to say, now for something completely different. My saw died. I had trouble with the switch. It wouldn't stop, and so you can't you can't have a saw that could do this kind of damage to you or the stone or both, not being able to stop. So if you buy serious equipment, this is not a throwaway side grinder. It's a nice Milwaukee 7-inch side grinder, and they're not cheap. I think it's smart to buy something that you can replace locally. Like, I know you can buy like Jim always used to use Metabo grinders. They were great, but there wasn't anybody in town that sold them. Or what he did was he had warranty stuff, and he'd send them in, so he always had to have 2 or 3. if you have equipment like this that you rely on and you have to replace it, it's going to save, just like being able to tip chisels when you need them, instead of having to say, oh God, I got to buy 4 more chisels and I got to spend $20 to get 4 chisels shipped. I could have bought 5 chisels with that money instead of 4. You know, if you're set up with some equipment to do basic stuff, I didn't video this because I'm not trying to start a, you know, repair your own power tools channel. But because this is a good piece of equipment that's meant for serious use, you know, and I can go buy a new one if I need to. If this dies, I can get in the truck in half an hour, 20, you know, 40 minutes, 30, 40 minutes, I can be back in studio working. But this has a switch that you can open up and grease it, check it, service it, whatever. It's just, you know, half a dozen screws to take out, and then you just flips and flips, you take the switch apart. And you can, this needed to be lubricated. It needed to be clean and lubricated. It's been used for a long time. And so I just, you know, spent, you know, half an hour, 45 minutes, whatever, going through it, figuring out what was wrong. I tried blowing it out, and then I had to take it apart and actually clean it and re-grease it and everything. But now it works just good. It clicks on and off, because before it was hanging up and not coming out. Now it works just fine. So if you buy good equipment, you can take care of it and you can service it yourself. A lot of times it isn't just disposable, so it makes it worth the money, at least to me. All right, we're shot another point or two on her shoulder, upper arm, and you can look here. I was looking at the points, the elevations and stuff, and it looks really different because of the way I'm looking at it. But I got up and measured it with 2 rulers, you know, one straight up and one over, to try to measure. And their point, that's what I'm saying. This can look really deceptive having this extra mass on. Get your method down and trust it. So now I'm going to shoot some more points on the feathers, 1 or 2 down here. And these are getting down to where they're going to be potentially down to this 8-inch level. They're going to be pretty deep. So I'll leave stone on the edge here some, but they'll be deeper than this. This is quite a bit deeper, quite a bit higher. And the other thing I wanted to point out is get used to, and this is just kind of a habit, get used to marking all your points. You know, when you pick the pencil up, if you can't glance and see all your points, just give them a spin and mark them. Because you'll lose track of them, and that's really a drag. Because then you end up accidentally cutting one off, and now you're screwed. So, but because I worked with some grease, because I clean this and I clean my hands really good, I'm going to go up and I'm going to clean off completely, because I can still feel like there's a little something, even though my hands are nice and dry. I don't want any grease on my stone ever. I want to stay away. I'm just going to go up. I'm going to clean up, and I'll come back down and do some more cutting and shoot some more points. All right, but take care of your equipment. Get stuff you can fix and learn how to fix it. It's worth it. I talk about trusting the process. Okay, shot the next point down, the next feather down. This feather tip is above the background. This one is almost flush with the background. It's about 7 1/4 inches deep. See how deep it is? And because the one from each end, because they're so straight, those 2 lines are superimposed. So they meet completely. Then they cross. That's my point. That's 3 lines. There's 2 lines in this vertical line right here. And that's a lot of digging. Now, one of the things I had to do, and I'm going to just put this up here. I'm not going to, I should just be brief. I had to make sure that I relieved all of this edge here to the right, underneath here, because it was fouling it. This is one of the benefits that you'll get out of these beam compasses, because you can configure them however you need them to be. You can tip the ends, you can make them longer, you get a lot better access. Right here, I had enough room, enough extra material I could take that off. Otherwise, to reach in with a regular pair of calipers, I used a pair of the old Italian compasses here from the top, and it just barely clears. See, that's hitting right there. So I'm to the point of having to, and I actually bumped that with my hand machine and chipped it a little bit while I was flogging this out. You're going to have points that are scary deep, you know, and I knew I had to go really deep, but I didn't want to just cut in here. I'd rather have some extra material on here. But this looks a lot taller because I've got extra material on it. If I cut that off, it would lower this point visually so that we could see that it's nowhere near as tall like this as we think it is. It still is a bit taller, but there's a big difference between that last turned up feather and the next high point below it. And it's also way in almost flush with her elbow on her arm up here. So that all maps out, you know, and that's what I say, you got to have an idea where you're going, because there's going to be points when you're just digging. This is what Gary always said. He hated doing statues because you start pointing and there's so much digging to do, it just drives you nuts. So I'm going to keep on digging. I'm going to put a point right there at that cross, mark it, and then I'm going to one more down here that I've got marked and I got to dig as well. And I'll probably hog a whole bunch of this off and get to it. But we're getting into it. This is what I'm talking about. There's going to be a lot of volume for her. She's going to come clear up to the surface just about. And so there's plenty of volume to make her nice and full. She shouldn't be flat. Keep on pointing, man. My name's Clint Button. I'm a granite sculptor here at Carolina Sculptor Studio with the Virtual Stone Carving Apprenticeship. Thank you for coming in.